Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this very special event that we're running today for schools, girls' schools across Australia. My name is Helen Trinker. I'm a senior editor and writer at the Australian newspaper and edit the Deal magazine, which is part of our stable of magazines. I'm talking to you today, of course, from our headquarters in Sydney, and it's amazing. We're so thrilled to be able to have this event and to have schools join us, because in the past we've run it as a physical event, and of course this year we couldn't do that and we turned it into a virtual, and it's given us the opportunity to go very much more broadly, and we have schools from across Australia joining us to hear from our fantastic panel, who I'm going to introduce shortly. Just wanted to mention the schools that I think have joined us, and there may even be others online, but in no particular order. Welcome to the girls from Willoughby High, from Girrawheen High School, from Winona in North Sydney, from the Melbourne Girls Grammar, from Ipswich Girls Grammar, and also from Loreto Normanhurst. So fabulous that you're all here. We're also joined today by some members of Chief Executive Women, which is the advocacy group for women in corporate Australia, and in fact in all of Australia, and some of those have joined us today. And of course, Chief Executive Women are one of our partners constantly in our special women's issue that we run every year. And this discussion today will form some content in that magazine, which comes out on November the 20th. So we're delighted to be able to do it. So welcome everyone. Now, I just want to introduce our panel, and again, in no particular order. I'll start with Pip Marlow, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Salesforce Australia. Pip has had a fantastic career in sort of in this digital space in some ways, and she's very much in an area where the jobs of the future are going to be formed or are already forming. She was for 21 years working at Microsoft in Australia and in other places outside Australia as well. She ended up being Managing Director of Microsoft for about 6 years, and then she went to Suncorp and more recently to Salesforce. She's also a non-executive director of several organisations, including Rugby Australia. So we might better talk about leadership in rugby as well. So Pip, thank you very much for making the time to join us today.
My pleasure.
Lovely, thank you. And secondly to Edwina McCann. Now, Edwina is a colleague of mine here, of course, at News Corp. She's had a fabulous career for a long time in fashion journalism particularly, but she's now one of the leading media executives in Australia, and also editor-in-chief of Vogue, of course, that wonderful magazine that I'm sure you are all either reading or aspiring to read soon, Vogue Living, and also GQ. So thrilled to have you as well, Edwina. And finally, thrilled indeed to have Zinnia Kumar. Now, Zinnia is joining us from London, and I hate to think what time it is, Zinnia. I didn't check my clock, but we're thrilled that you could make it here. Zinnia is in London because she's doing a Masters in Science at the moment at the University College London, but she already has a few science degrees and under her belt. She's particularly interested in evolutionary psychology, which of course has got a lot of connection with workplace and work as well. And she's an unusual sort of portfolio worker in so many ways, because she's a fashion model and she's a public speaker. She has clients who she advises, and of course she's got a big online media presence. So thank you so much, Zinnia, for being here. Now, I'm going to, so the process today is that we'll have a number of questions. We'll probably go for about 35 minutes. And as I mentioned earlier, there'll be an edited transcript of this, which we'll publish on November the 20th, but you'll also be able to access it, and other people at the schools will be able to access it online, and I think I've sent that link to the schools, of course. So to get started, I think what I'd like to ask you, Pip, firstly, oh yes, thrilled with Anna Bligh is here as well. Thank you, Anna. We've just got you in. We're just completing the introduction. So Anna, welcome. Anna Bligh is the CEO of the Australian Banking Association. She's had a very big year this year, rebuilding the trust and confidence of Australians in the whole banking sector, and it's a big job, a tremendous job. But of course, Anna, we're going to ask you a few questions, of course, about your previous career as Premier of Queensland, which is it doesn't get much better than that in terms of success. So we're very pleased to be able to have you here as well. We're about to start with some questions, and I'll go back and start with Pip on this one. Pip, and I'll ask it of all of you, but Pip, if you had to think of 2 or 3 things that you'd say to this audience of girls today about what they should be doing now to ensure that they are successful in their careers and their work, what would they be?
Well, there's a couple of things I'd be recommending. One is I know you're at school right now and you're learning, you're doing maths and English and sciences, and those are fantastic, but actually also you're learning to learn. I think Helen said it in her opening, many of the jobs of the future, they don't exist right now. When I graduated school, there was no Facebook, no LinkedIn. These are companies that are new companies, Afterpay, all these new companies are being created. So the skills you're learning right now are to be a lifelong learner, because the jobs of the future, they don't exist. So you're going to have to learn skills and continue to be reskilling and learning, including myself. I'm learning all the time. So take advantage of learning how to learn, basically. So think about that. The second thing I would say is, I think, certainly, and I see it with my own children, I have a daughter who's the same age as many of you. She's just started year 12 at Monty, a neighbour to our Winona school. And I would say, you have an incredible opportunity right now to be building resilience, risk-taking, critical thinking. And those are all skills that when you're in any industry will help you be resourceful, have an impact. So think about those other types of capability. And ultimately take some risks, and smart risks, because at the end of the day, we will all try things, we will fail. We have to get back up in all our jobs and when things don't work. So take some smart risks and realize you don't have to do things perfectly. You don't have to check every box in a job description when you apply for a job. You might be 80% of it, and that's okay. And you're going to come into a new role and you'll learn on the fly and learn things as you go. So get used to taking some risks and building resilience and making some mistakes, because nobody's perfect. And once you're in the workplace, we want people who try new things. We want people who, after they've made a mistake, can get back up and try and learn from that and do something different. So I encourage you to do that. Sometimes, though, in taking risks, I know I still have it. I have this little voice, in my head going, "Oh, Pip, maybe you shouldn't do that, or maybe you're not good enough." Just remember, we all have fear. Fear is a feeling. It is not a fact. So when you hear that little voice of fear that's, maybe trying to hold you back, just remember it's normal to feel those things when you're trying something new. But I love that saying, feel the fear and do it anyway. And I encourage you guys to feel the fear and do it anyway. What's the worst that can happen?
Pip, that's fantastic. I love the way that you're asking or reminding people that the need to take risks, because, of course, I think for teenage girls, particularly now, it's actually really hard. I mean, it's not an environment often at school or, in the pressure on kids to actually be able to take risks. They feel as if they have to channel their energies in one particular area. So that's great advice. So thank you. And so, Anna, I might come to you now, and, what would your advice be? Anna, sorry, we might go to Edwina then. Edwina, what about your advice, if you'd like to offer us your...
Well, I couldn't agree with what Pip said more. I think the big thing is don't be afraid to fail. I know in my career some of the times I've learnt the most, and in fact, when things have been accelerated is when I've been challenged, and indeed sometimes when I have failed, I have learned skills and resilience, and that has stood me in good stead. So definitely don't be afraid to fail. Obviously, embracing technology, every career is going to be in some way impacted by technology in the future, and you need to be literate at the very least, so that you're well prepared for future leadership roles. And then, I mean, I've got daughters too, like Pip, and I went to Winona, so hello to all the Winonians. I think watching my daughters the other day, and they're in Year 9, this is struggling with perfection, and I'm a little worried about how much potentially that has been influenced by social media and wanting to project perfection to one another. I think being able to walk up to your teacher and say, you know what, I'm just not getting this in maths. Do you think you could help me? Rather than sort of beating yourself up because you just don't quite understand it. Really embracing the, I don't know, would you mind explaining? Again, in the workplace, I think is essential, and not allowing your ego or your pride to get in the way of that. Again, that gives you access to others' knowledge. People will always be much more, you think they're sitting there thinking, you know, everybody's pretending they know what one another's talking about. You are much better to actually speak up and say, I don't know, and take time to allow somebody else to teach you.
Great, thank you for that. And now, Anna, what do you think? What are your 2 or 3 tips that you'd give to the generation that's still at school today about success?
Thank you, Helen, and I'm sorry I'm having a bit of trouble with the platform. I'd say a couple of things, very much echoing some of what's already been said. Firstly, most of us end up these days, and it's going to be more so in the future, doing lots of different things, very different than what you thought you would be doing in your 20s, and then in your 30s you're doing something very different again. So the importance of just being very open to new directions and new opportunities, and that might take you somewhere you never imagined, because often those places are the most challenging and interesting and satisfying and exciting. I think that whole issue of fear is still a really important one for women and girls. And I would probably characterize it as, you know, don't be too fearful of failure. If I had to talk about the times in my life I have learnt the most, it's when something's gone wrong. It is when I've tried something and it didn't work. And yes, it's a terrible feeling, you know, when something goes terribly wrong and it's, you know, on your shoulders. But boy, you learn so much and it stretches you so much. And I think, you know, most successful people would say they've learnt as much from failure along the way. And the last thing I'd say is that success isn't just about your working life. It's not just about the career you end up in. There are big decisions that we all make as adults, things like, will we become parents? You know, will we opt for motherhood? And there are so many things that the other parts of your life will bring to and contribute to your overall success. You know, the partner you choose, the decision about family, the opportunities you take to go and travel, to take some time off, you know, to learn a musical instrument, to all of those other things. I think when I look at the most successful people, there's other things in their life that they're passionate about. You know, they're mad cyclists, or, you know, they're absolutely passionate about a particular musician or something. You know, success has to be a multifaceted thing, and it's okay to take time out here and then to travel for 12 months. You will learn as much doing that as you will learn, you know, in some of the workplaces that you'll spend some time. So, you know, having a broad definition, I think, of success, and taking time out, you know, to be a mother. That's okay. That's a good thing. I can tell you, most of what I think I've learned about myself as a person has been the challenge of motherhood.
Yeah, great. Anna, thank you for that. I'll go to Zinnia now. Zinnia, you're probably, without being disrespectful to all the rest of us, certainly the closest in age to our audience. And I'd be very interested in knowing what you think yourself in terms of your tips for the students, but also in some senses you've got a slightly different sort of job in some ways, of course, obviously, because you haven't gone through the corporate track and you're going in a very different path. So what do you think is important to pass on to this group?
Thank you, Helen. Well, for me personally, I think it's all about being persistent and consistent. And if there's ever a rejection or failure, don't worry, because I feel like rejection is a temporary state. You can always change it. And it's also about staying curious and challenging everything you think and the way you think about things, because as the ladies have been saying, we're in like an unprecedented time, and all the jobs of the future are going to be completely different to the jobs that exist now. So they're going to be about combining completely different fields together, and it's all about keeping that open mind and not being afraid to ask for help, looking for mentors that can help you along the way. And I mean, these are the things that have helped me personally along my way, and I really think they will help you too.
Excellent. I'm just going to move on a little bit, and actually I'd just like to find a little bit more out about each of your personal journeys. And why you chose the career you did. So I'm actually going to go to Anna first and ask, why did you decide you wanted to be the Premier?
That was a very long journey, Helen. I think Pip said before, many of the jobs of the future don't exist now, but it's equally true that some of the jobs that exist now will be more open to different people than they were or they are now. So, when I was in high school, when I was sitting in year 12, I can absolutely assure you, firstly, there were no women in politics in Australia in any situations of prominence. I think there was 1 or 2 women in the federal parliament, and that was about it. So I never imagined that was something that would be part of my life. I did become very interested in politics when I was at university. It was a particularly interesting time in the political life of Queensland, and a lot of young people got very involved. But I went into the workforce. I started off in a social work degree. I changed to a more broad humanities degree. I then went and worked in a women's refuge, in a family and children's centre, mostly in social welfare and community services. And that's where I thought I would spend my working life. But I got more and more involved in politics. An unexpected opportunity came up, and I was encouraged by a lot of people, mostly a lot of women in the party, to put myself forward. It came at a time when there was still very few women in the political life of our country, but there was a very big move from women on all sides of politics to put more women in those positions. So I was very much a beneficiary of a changed attitude and a period of change for women. And, that train stopped at the station. It came at a very inconvenient time. I had a 10-month-old baby when I had to make the decision. And that baby was 20 months old when I was elected, because you have to nominate long before the election. And even when I became a member of parliament, again, Australia at that time had never had a woman lead a political party. And, I've always been someone who was happy to, I've always wanted to, I've thought about what is it in yourself that makes you put yourself forward for those leadership positions. And I don't know that I can fully define it, but I know that even in school, I was the one putting my hand up. I'll do that. Can I have that? I'll try this. And, again, I was involved at a time of very significant social, political, and economic change in the place of women. And as the opportunities emerged for me to be a cabinet minister, and I think this probably goes back to some of what the other speakers have said, I started to really look around the table. And when it was clear that there may be a change of leadership, I really, of course, as Pip said, I thought I couldn't do that. What makes me think I could do that? That would be really hard. People will be mean to me. What if I got it wrong? And all of those doubts were rife in my mind. But I really did a long, hard look around the table and thought, is there anyone here that is so much better than me that I should put my ambition to one side? And my answer was no. So I put my hand up. So no, I didn't start dreaming about this when I was, 17 years old. But it goes back to what I said. There were opportunities came in my 20s, 30s and 40s that just simply did not exist in my teens. And the world changes so much in that time. And you've got to be ready to seize the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Yes, I think that's a really excellent point, that the world does change. And I think when you're growing up, you're sort of not so sure of that, because your world hasn't changed that much. But the longer it goes on, the more you realise it does, and grabbing those opportunities is incredibly important. Just wondering, Pip, whether you'd answer that question too. I mean, you just really, how did you end up at Microsoft, I suppose, is the question, first of all.
Yeah, I say I fell into IT by chance and stayed in it by choice. I'm going to be really honest. I took my first job in an IT company. I had 2 job offers, one in banking and one in IT. And I took that first job because it paid $500 more than the other. I took my first job for money, and it was my early learning. the company I worked for was terrible. The culture was terrible, and I left. And so the first thing I'd say is money won't make you happy. You need to find a career where you are treated with respect, and you can contribute and do the best work of your life. And just taking a job for money was an early mistake I made, but it did introduce me to technology. And I thought, I love this technology thing because it's allowed me to work in every single industry. Technology helps education, healthcare, retail, fashion. Every industry these days is powered by technology, and I got really excited about what that could be. But I also learned a very valuable lesson early on in that regard. And I found my way to Microsoft. Actually, I was doing a startup before Microsoft, and I started engaging with Microsoft. I had this really brilliant business idea that I was trying to sell to Microsoft, and I was so brilliant that I couldn't get them to do it. But I kept coming back and knocking on their door, trying different ways, and they finally said, "Look, we like what you're doing, but we don't like how you're doing it. So why don't you come and work for us and try and fix it from this side?" And I went, oh, okay. So what they saw from me was just this tenacious, go-getting, trying to do something, but I wasn't successful in trying to do it from that angle. And then I came in, and as you mentioned at the start, I worked there for 21 years, 8 of them in the US. But I just want to touch on something Anna talked about. It wasn't until maybe halfway through my time at Microsoft that I had the ambition that I could declare to run Microsoft Australia and become the MD. And I struggled to actually declare that ambition for a period of time, because I thought if I told people that that's the job I aspired to, that I wouldn't be like a team player, or maybe I would come across as arrogant because I had that ambition. And two things can be true at the same time. You can have ambitions and still have values and be a good person and a team player and have humility. It is okay to declare your dreams and aspirations. In fact, once you do that, you will find people who help you achieve it. And I think, even Anna said that before. Once, she said, yes, people came out of the woodwork to help her. Once I declared that, yes, I aspired to do that job one day, I had people investing time in me to help me prepare to, be a strong candidate for that. So don't hold back in having big dreams and declaring them, and then you'll be surprised what can happen.
Lovely. Good. Well, thank you for that, Pip. Now, Edwina, I guess it was a no-brainer wanting to be a fashion journalist, but can you just tell us briefly how you got to be where you are?
Yeah, so, I feel quite lucky to have worked in media, probably one of the most disrupted industries really there is at the moment, because of the change. And I think I was lucky in that I was attracted to fashion at a very early age, but I actually went to UTS to do architecture and then moved into communications. But I had a love for fashion, and I always had a love for Vogue. And so I was aiming to try to get a job on Vogue, and there was really only 1 or 2 assistant jobs at that time, and it was in image making more than writing, which is really what I wanted to do. So I just took that opportunity when it came up. To be honest with you, that is a glorified career job. So I did that for quite a long time. And I think it's really important early on in your career to park your ego and to be willing to work really hard and do any job really that you're asked to do, and to just learn from those around you. So then I was lucky. I went to the Australian for where I spent about 7 years. Effectively really as a cadet, although things were a lot less official back then. And again, I was surrounded by journalists who helped me, who taught me computer systems, for example, which nobody really trained me to use except the person sitting next to you. So I've been lucky to be in an industry that has seen enormous change. And I think the fact that I was interested in fashion is about the future. It is very future focused. And so fashion always makes you think about what's coming next. And it absolutely, I would say, gives you access, or it's certainly given me access to pretty much anyone, anywhere, anyone. And that has been an enormous opportunity, again, to learn.
Great, thank you. And Zinnia, I won't talk to you about your fashion career because we've had a little bit of that from Edwina. I'm just interested, though, the science. There's a lot of interest in girls going to in that direction. What prompted your interest in it?
Well, I think it began like I was 5 years old and I was addicted to David Attenborough. So I was this kid who was 5 years old in Australia who ended up having this British accent because I used to watch way too much David Attenborough. And so I knew I wanted to go down the conservation route. And so I went to university and I studied ecology, and I became a conservation biologist. So I worked with the little blue penguins in Australia and water birds, and it was my absolute dream job. And like Pip said, sometimes something random completely happens. And I actually got allergic to eucalyptus trees. So I had to kind of change my career. And I loved science, so I knew I wanted to kind of stay in the field. So I decided to go down the field of like human evolutionary psychology, particularly look at human attraction and like why we perceive people the way we do and what we can infer from that. And so I ran some research projects through that, and I published papers in there. And then after that, I kind of felt like I wasn't really helping anyone in that way. So I became a youth ambassador for the Department of Foreign Affairs, and I went to Thailand and I was teaching English there. And while I was there, I met some 5-year-old girls, and it was really sad because they were telling me, even though they were 5, that they weren't beautiful because of the color of their skin. They weren't light skinned like the celebrities on TV. And I realized that was colorism. So when I came back to Australia after my trip away, I felt really passionate about kind of combating this problem, this social problem. So what I did was I wrote a research proposal and I sent it off to the University of Oxford, and they accepted me on their program. So I started to research colorism and how to kind of like combat this, because it really was disempowering women. Like this visual sphere and the way it was working was making all of these young women and older women all feel absolutely terrible. And then as I was doing that, I realized, hang on a sec, I could write this amazing research paper, which would be really wonderful. But actually, if I wanted to impact as many people as I can, the visual sphere, like as Edwina was saying, you can access so many people through fashion as well, makes a big difference. So I started working on a documentary to do with colorism. And then as I was doing that, I also realized, hang on a sec, I can actually combine science with my interest in fashion and social issues as well. So I started a consultancy, which is called The Dotted Line. And through that, I kind of combine all of these interests together. And like, I've kind of created my own field, if that makes sense. So, I mean, you can combine all your different interests together in a way to create something new.
Excellent. That's good. Listen, I'm just going to move on to an area about social media, which obviously is incredibly important to all of us, particularly to younger people at the moment. Just quickly, from those who are the 3 people who do a fair bit of hiring, how important is social media? I mean, are you looking at social media feeds when you're hiring someone, and can that be a negative to you, for example? Maybe first to you, Pip, on that, because we hear that we've got to be careful about social media, but how important is it going forward?
Yeah, it is important. I mean, you are creating a digital footprint. And certainly, when I grew up, whatever I did on the weekend, didn't get posted. And these days, you can see it in international news where people are saying, oh, this person's got a photo from 20 years ago where they did X, and that's their brand and reputation. And so, yeah, I think we do need to be very aware of our digital footprint and what we represent. And so it is something I talk a lot to my children about. That said, I think we also, it's about your behaviors, your values, it's what you stand for. Social media has been an incredible tool too. When you think about Black Lives Matter, when you think about Me Too movement, social media is a platform for us all to have a voice and to drive change. So I don't want to say, to my kids or, employees, don't use social media. I say, be thoughtful about it, use it for good. In the workplace, I'm sure Edwina would say this too. We love to empower people to share stories and create content and do that. It's incredibly powerful. But like anything, it can be used for bad as well. I do encourage everyone listening to watch The Social Dilemma on Netflix if you haven't. It's a really interesting, docudrama sort of thing around social media, how it's being used, and being aware of, when we drive a car, we're thoughtful about that particular thing and the rules of driving, what side of the road and how it works. This is a really good thing for you to understand how social media works and what social media is also trying to get you to do. So be masters of your own destiny.
Good. Anna, do you know whether employers are sort of checking social media much these days before they employ someone? Is that something that you've got an awareness of even for your members?
Helen, I think it's pretty mixed. I think there are some who included in part of their sort of due diligence, referee checking, etc. And while I would absolutely agree with everything that Pip said, I don't think any of us really want some of our worst moments being 14 to dog us for the rest of our lives. But I do think there is a growing sort of acceptance that some of what people might see on social media over a long period of time on someone's digital footprint doesn't necessarily tell you much about them today. So yes, I absolutely agree. Be careful. Remember that this is what you're telling the world about who you are. But there are so many other ways that people will judge you as well. Yeah. It'll be, what did you say in the interview? What did you, bring to the opportunity? So, if you do make a terrible mistake and there is some shocking thing out there, don't let it defeat you, I think is the other message I would say. But I also know plenty of employees who don't look at it at all. But we were projecting forward. I think it probably is going, and the ability to do a quick check will become easier and simpler. So I think that probably, you can expect, and some positions, obviously, it's going to be more important than others. Yeah, but it's a very powerful tool for communication, for support. Finding people who think like you do, who can support you in difficult things you're going through. So, we should embrace it, but yes, you've got a long life ahead of you, girls. Don't let some silly moment dog you forever. Yeah. You'll live with it for a long time.
That's right. Yeah, the inevitability of it being a major force for us, I think, is something that we've really all kind of understood much more. And the idea, I know, is for parents, it's always a sort of a drama. How much you can control it. But on we go. Edwina, I just want to move to you and really ask you a question about another subject that is very much top of mind for a lot of women and young women, is a sort of a level of sexism that might still be out there. And that's a very sort of blunt word to use, and I know it's much more subtle than that. But where do you think we're at with that gender debate at the moment, and what advice would you give these year 10 and year 11 girls on that?
I think that's really the sum of two parts, really, two quite different stories. I've found recently that I've been had a few advisory board positions and board positions where I know that, they really want female voices. They're actively searching. I'm thrilled, finally, for a different point of view and for female voices. So I'm hopeful that by the time you're all a little older, we won't need to discuss sexism. But the reality is, yes, it still does exist in the workforce. It is also a way for people of my generation of needing to almost retrain some of our minds. Certainly for me, having worked in fashion, which certainly in the newspaper industry when I was growing up was women's business, and, over on those funny little pages over there, it was quite difficult to be taken seriously as a businesswoman within media organisations, running businesses that make money. It's not just about women talking about a length of a skirt line. So yes, certainly I've experienced it, as I'm sure everyone on this panel has. But I do think it is changing. I do believe it is changing. Is it changing fast enough? Maybe not, but are there wonderful organisations like CEW out there? Yes. Are they impactful? Yes. Do we see great female leadership now to look up to? If you can see it, you can bear it. Yes. Our boards, certainly the ones I've sat on, actively trying to recruit and also listen to women. Yes. So hopefully by the time you're older, this will be something of the past.
Yeah, indeed. Xenia, what do you think about this? Do you think you're taken as seriously as the male cohort of your age group? Yes,
as
taken
in
seriously in terms of like just
I guess
the weight of your ideas, your future, your capacity to do jobs, that sort of thing. I mean, I just wondered how you feel, because it's interesting for me, for obviously as a much older woman, and I've sort of, we've come up through a period where there was a lot of, a lot of authority given to men and not given to women. Now that's obviously changed, but hearing from you would be very interesting on that.
I think just generally speaking, I feel like there's a lot more space for me to speak up, and people making more room for females in general to speak. But I mean, in terms of like the science spaces, I feel like it's still very male dominated. So I think in terms of, depends on the field and the area. I feel like there's some room for improvement, but generally speaking, it's moved so much further, even in the last 5 years, than it has in a long time. So I feel like there's definitely more room for women, and the spaces are opening up, and there's so many more female CEOs in Fortune 500 companies than there has ever been in history. So I think there's movement. Yeah, good, thank you.
I'm going to switch topic a little bit, just to COVID. I mean, it's been such a major impact on everyone in this country, and also obviously Zinnia for you in the UK in the middle of it all. I'm just wondering that there's been a lot of commentary about the fact that women missed out in COVID. They either had to work from home and bear the brunt of the child caring at home, and they've also obviously at some levels missed out on jobs earlier on, and I know some of those jobs are coming back. But leaving that to the short-term impact to one side, I'm just wondering whether any of you think that in fact women are now going to be having to rethink the way that they look at their careers, and that they may in fact be encouraged or almost forced at some level to sort of go back and work more in the domestic sphere than the corporate sphere. I just might start with you, Anna, on that, whether you think there's any change. I suppose the question is there any sort of long-lasting change from the year that we've had where things were disrupted so much, and in terms of the impact on women?
I think there's, like all big changes, are going to be positive and negative, Helen. I think we've already seen women very disproportionately impacted by the loss of jobs and the loss of hours in the workforce. And I think that that's going to have a more prolonged impact than we might have thought at the beginning. I think everyone thought we'd have this sort of V-shaped recovery and it would all be fixed pretty quickly. I think what we're now seeing is that those people who are unemployed may well be unemployed for a much longer period, or those businesses that are still either closed or only open part of the time are going to experience that for quite a while. And if that happens over a 2 to 3 year period, for those women who are either completely out of the workforce or back to 10 hours a week instead of 30, that has a big impact over a working life. It impacts on your superannuation. It impacts on your earning ability. It impacts on your confidence. It impacts on your ability to get back into the workplace. So I do think, for all that we've seen, I think last year we saw the highest participation rate of women in the paid workforce in Australia's history, which was a sort of great high watermark. But now I do think we are going to see, it's the same as all social change. You have two steps forward, one step back, and I do think we've got to accept that we are going to see some of that. But I think there's some really interesting plus long-term effects on the positive side. I think corporate Australia particularly, but all parts of the economy, have learned a lot more about working from home and working flexibly, and that becoming much more acceptable and entrenched. And I don't think we're going to go backwards on that. I think we will see more people going back to the office than we've seen during COVID. But the ability for people to say, look, you need 40 hours a week out of me and you need these 5 documents done by Friday, and I'll deliver that. But I can take my kids to school. I can take half an hour out at 9 a.m. I can, work from home 3 mornings a week and manage that. Your question earlier about sexism, one of my answers would have been, one of the things I would have said is, I think what I observe for many young women is that they really hit the wall of sexism when they have their first child. The minute they announce to anyone that they're pregnant, they realise just how gender stereotyped the world still is. And I think what's happened out of COVID could actually help break a lot of that down, yet to be seen. But I think both young women and young men going into the, the next decade or so of their career are going to experience a much higher level of tolerance in their workplace than was previously the case for their work to be done just like we're doing now, using
fantastic.
Not having to travel, traveling to Melbourne for a meeting that's an hour and a half is practically one whole day out, and often having to go overnight the night before, all of that out of the rest of your life and away from the people that matter to you. I really think that's potentially got a long-term benefit for both men and women during particularly their childbearing and rearing years.
Good. Thank you, Anna. I'm just going to now, we're on to our final question. I'd want to go to you, Zinnia, first. And people often ask, what's the worst and best thing that ever happened to you in your career? But I think we might just focus on the optimistic ones. Can you identify and perhaps just talk briefly about the best thing that you can think of that's happened to you and why it was such a good thing? I'm talking not personal life, but professional life.
Yeah. So I was working as a motivational speaker, and I was running this workshop at a university. And so at the beginning of the day, this young Indigenous girl came up to me and she said that I'm too stupid to go to university. And, when you hear something like that, it breaks your heart. So throughout the day, we kind of empowered all the girls and really worked together to try and really make sure everyone felt like they were being supported. And I think the most wonderful thing at the end of that day was that she came up to me at the end of the day and she whispered in my ear and she said, there's a space for me at university. I think I can go. And I think that was probably the best day of my life, really.
It's wonderful. Yeah. Yes, that's a great story. Pip, what about your high point of your life so far?
Yeah, so it was going to be a very similar story to Zinnia. I spent some time mentoring out at a school in a disadvantaged community, and where a lot of people are dealing with second and third generation unemployment, first language at home not English, and actually talking to a group of young women about what is possible. And those are the moments when you had an impact on somebody's life like that. That makes everything you do worthwhile. The other element I would say is all the really crappy moments at work when I was in a really tough time thinking, holy moly, I don't know if I can do this. And then at the end of it, achieving it, the best things I've ever done at work were not easy. They were really hard and uncomfortable. And I'm trying to, I say, shorten the distance from pain to the joy. When you are working out, it's, the best things aren't like going to the movies and relaxing. It's more like going to the gym. Yeah. When you've had that workout and you've achieved something, that was cool.
Actually, it's good, isn't it? It's a good one to remember too. I think the fact that, often you think you haven't learned anything through several years of working, and it's good to remind yourself that the gap between thinking you can't do it and doing it, actually, rely on your experience and go back to the fact you've been doing it for a long time is really useful. To you, Edwina, what about your high point? And you could say that it was when you were working with me at the Australian, but
I will say that. It was definitely when I was working for Helen at the Australian and had my twin girls, and she supported me. She was a wonderful boss. It was also probably Vogue Codes. So that's our program with Codes to encourage young women to engage with careers in technology and to think about things differently. And a mother actually wrote to me and said, I brought my teenage daughter who was passionate about fashion but actually very good at math to one of your events, and by the end of it she was saying she was going to give up maths prior to the event, and by the end of it she said, you know what, Mum, I'm going to stick with my maths. And I thought, well, that's great. If Vogue has convinced somebody who's passionate about fashion to stick with maths,
excellent,
that's
good.
A pretty good achievement.
And Anna, I guess yours is, I don't know, that election night, but do you want to tell us what your high point was?
Look, certainly, I've had, in politics, in a democracy, there's always ups and downs. And yes, Helen, I've won an election that no one expected me to win, which was always wonderful, and lost an election, which is never good. But I think I would probably say it was, I became Premier when my predecessor, Peter Beattie, retired halfway through a term, and my caucus elected me as leader. And then I went to an election 18 months later. So for me, the day that I was sworn in as the first woman to be the Premier of Queensland, And I was sworn in by Quentin Bryce, who was then the Governor of Queensland and later became Australia's first female Governor-General. And both Quentin and I felt at that moment, sometimes you're very, very, I always like to say, I think women of this generation are making history every single day. Every one of us are doing things that was impossible for our grandmothers. But there are days when you really are very clear. Right at this moment, I am making history, and it's an incredible feeling. And Quentin, of course, made some wonderful remarks, but also made the remark that she looked forward. She said, this is a remarkable moment, but I look forward to a time when it's not. And I think that firsts are really important when you're making big changes. But I always think the most powerful is the second and the third and the fourth, because then you've moved from remarkable to normal. And I look at the political landscape today, and we've got an election in New Zealand next on the weekend, and both the leader of the country, the Prime Minister, and the leader of the opposition are women. And then 2 weeks later, we've got an election in Queensland, and the Premier and the leader of the opposition are both women. That to me says we've moved from a novelty to normal. And I'd certainly sensed at that moment, and it's a bit like what Pip said, there were lots of really tough times getting there, but it's so, you feel, all the hard work is worth it. And I really felt, I had spent a lot of my time as a young woman never seeing women in these kind of positions. And I really felt if young women see just one woman like me in this position, then you can be what you can see. And so it's been very gratifying for me to see more and more and more women on all sides of politics putting up their hand, jumping in, having a go.
It's wonderful. Good. Thank you, Anna. And listen, thank you very much to all of our panel, to Pip Marlow, CEO of Salesforce, to Edwina McCann, who is Editor-in-Chief of Vogue Living and other titles, to Zinnia Kumar, who can only be described, I think, as, portfolio worker extraordinaire, especially coming to us from London, and also to Anna Bligh, the CEO of the Australian Banking Association. Thank you to all of the schools who joined us today. And just a reminder that we'll have an edited transcript of this in the Australian on November the 20th. And once again, good luck, and take out that word, yes, remarkable. Going from remarkable to normal is good, but you are all remarkable, and hang on to that as well. So thank you and goodbye.